Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, a place where you can keep informed of the latest business and tech trends by listening to stories of other people in your field and how they are overcoming challenges with emerging technologies. Join me in learning from the guests actionable tips and lessons learned to obtain greater clarity on how you or your business can leverage technology. Now, I recently read CircleCI's 2022 State of Software Delivery Report, which highlighted the state of software delivery and provided some much-needed insights into the qualities of the most successful engineering teams around the world. So today, I invited Rob Zuber on the podcast to discuss a number of topics around how low-code and no-code are dominating conversations at the moment. And I also want to explore how the constant pressure to innovate faster, combined with the competition for developer talent, is actually leading companies to look towards no-code and low-code solutions to help developers get more done. So wherever you're listening in the world, it's time for you to buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way stateside so you can join me in conversation with Rob Zuber from CircleCI. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the leader in all things CI and CD. And as a CTO, I think most people, I like to say most people know what that means, but actually I think everyone does the job a little bit differently. I used to run the entire engineering organization, but I recently handed that off to someone else to give myself more space to do longer term product and technical strategy and sort of dive in on some big projects. So I've been with the company over 8 years and have had a lot of opportunity to do very different things across that time.
And before we find out more about what you're doing now and what excites you about the future, etc., I want to take you back in time. Can you remember where your passion for technology came from, or just a moment that kind of put you on this path you're on today, or should I say, share your origin story with us?
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's kind of two interesting parts to that. First, as a younger kid, I could never really get into software. I tried a few times. I went to the public library and learned Logo, if any of your listeners will remember that, and just didn't find it interesting at all, to be honest. But I was constantly interested in how things worked. I mean, I started cycling, and the first thing I did was take my bike apart and try to, figure out all the pieces and make sure everything was working smoothly. I play the guitar. I took my first electric guitar apart, basically ruined it in the process, but was trying to, change the tone a little bit or whatever. Like, just always interested in those sorts of things. And then, went to school, studied engineering, but a more classic discipline, I guess, in engineering physics. And then when I graduated, I was working as a process engineer in a factory. And my job was to optimize the process. Well, I mean, sort of as it sounds, look for areas where there were issues or that were causing defects, in production. And I spent, I would say 4 out of 5 days in the week just manually moving data around, trying to get to the point where I could see what was happening so I could then go do the actual work. And we were building computers, and I was like, I think computers can do this for us. Like, I think that we could do more human, creative, intelligent work if we got the computers to do all of this, kind of moving data around. And so I sort of was self-taught at that time, just figured out ways to get this done so that I could spend my time focusing on where the real challenges were in production. And I had so much fun doing that I ended up actually going to a startup that my friends had started in kind of late 90s and took off from there. So it was this, I think it was finally having an application, not just computers are interesting, let me learn about them, but wow, this really solves a problem for me. And I can turn my attention from, doing what today we would probably refer to as toil, like my job was toil. I could turn away from that and turn towards, actually doing the human creative work. And that's what excited me about software, and have never looked back, I guess.
Incredibly cool. And of course, it would be that path that led you to CircleCI. And your CEO, Jim Rose, he's been on the podcast twice in the last 5 years. But for new listeners, can you just remind them a little bit about the kind of problems that you're solving with technology at CircleCI?
Yeah, so I think at the highest level, I would imagine most of your listeners are comfortable with the notion that every software company or every company, sorry, is becoming a software company or is a software company at this point. I recently actually was on a road trip with my family. We had some car trouble that left us stranded in a pretty terrible spot, and that happened again. And ultimately, the fix was just a software upgrade on our car, and it's so fascinating to me to see that this transition is occurring, that even what we think of as these very sort of classic different engineering problems are now just software problems, right? And so what we're focused on is helping companies, either because they're starting out in the tech space or because they're transitioning into being very software centric, helping them deliver quickly and with confidence. Everyone is trying to move faster. There's all this pressure to compete. You see this again from cars to banks to kind of everywhere that you think is not about software. That's how they're differentiating. And there's pressure to deliver quickly, but it has to be done with quality. I mean, otherwise you get stranded in a national park sort of thing. So helping customers really build with confidence, see that they've created something of quality, get it out in front of their customers, reducing the risk of issues, but doing that very quickly. Everyone's trying to move faster and just giving them the confidence to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that quote, software is eating the world. I mean, even that's over a decade old already, isn't it?
Yeah. We've seen this coming for a long time. It's been a slow build. I think that started maybe thinking, there will be a company building software that will replace this company. But of course, the companies that exist and have been around for a really long time are saying, wait a second, we have all these other really valuable assets. We have the customer base, we have the distribution model, we have all these other things. We just need to get good at software and we'll be able to hold our ground here, right? So it's kind of this, both sides are pushing each other, kind of the software first versions of things are really pushing the envelope, while the, long-standing kind of larger organizations that own the customer relationships are saying, oh, we could also do that if we sort of reorient how we think about it. But ultimately, everyone's doing that, and the place that they're competing, or the center of all the competition, is the software that they're delivering and that digital experience that they're creating for their customers.
And one of the big reasons I wanted to invite you on the podcast today is to explore the world of no code. And just to set the scene, can you tell me a little bit more about how the constant pressure to innovate faster, combined with the competition for developer talent, is actually leading companies to look towards no code and low code solutions to help developers get more done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really nailed it there. Like there's limited capability or limited pool of really experienced software developers. Everyone's trying to do more, and ultimately, a lot of what we've done you go back to kind of any point in the history of software. We've solved some hard problems, and we don't necessarily need to solve those problems again, right? And we're not differentiating when we're solving the same hard problem that we already solved, right? So a lot of organizations, certainly the ones that are succeeding under all this pressure to deliver quickly and sort of out innovate their competitors, the ones that are succeeding are taking things off the shelf that they know work and combining those in new and unique ways, or adding their own unique capabilities on top of that to really build something for their customers and that's differentiated, right? So I think, we love to name things like low code and no code and create movements and revolutions and all this kind of stuff. But the notion of reusability in software has been around since very, very early days, right? We just wrote something ourselves and then built it into a library, and then sort of open source came into its own, and we said, wait a second, someone else wrote this library. I'll just take that library. And then we got third-party services. Like I don't build a login page anymore. I take it from an Auth0 or some other provider who's built that whole thing for me, so that I can focus on things that, again, that are unique and different. I mean, if you're building your own CAPTCHA right now, there's one out there that you can use. You could put your time and energy into those truly unique things. And so, when I think about low code, yes, there are like drag and drop toolkits and all this kind of stuff to try to get us there. But in reality, it's a natural extension of something that we've been doing a long time. And I think that progression has also created that progression, if that makes sense, meaning the more we've been able to achieve by reusing components that either we already built or someone else built, the faster we go, therefore the faster we expect ourselves to go, right? Like we're always looking to accelerate. And so there's more and more desire to work in that way.
And I think you just kind of busted one of the big myths out there as well, because a lot of people, as soon as they hear low code or no code, it's going to be, also, we don't need developers anymore, which is certainly not the case, because I think it's not replacing developers. It's more about enhancing how they work and speeding up the process. But can you expand on how it might be building tools for people who already know how to make software, but also neglecting the folks who don't actually want to be programmers? Because there's so much to unpack there, isn't there, about what problems it solves and what it doesn't solve.
Again, I would say we love to name things.
Yeah.
And so we have this notion of this big revolutionary thing of low code, no code, but there's a bunch of different ways you could describe that. Again, just reusability within software. And so when you talk about enabling people who are already software developers, absolutely. If the framing is, here are some reusable components and we're using them to build a software application, then you still want a software developer to be thinking about that outcome, right? They say, oh, great, I know how to take that thing off the shelf and integrate it into my piece, versus this notion that someone who knows nothing about software is going to build a great application. I think those are different things, like really two different problems to solve. Yeah. And so when we say low code / no code and sort of put it all under one bucket, we're talking about a bunch of different cases. And if I'm talking about building a custom software application, I probably want a software engineer, but I'm going to allow them to move a lot faster if all the sort of repetitive or already been solved work is done. They're stringing that together and layering on the unique sort of differentiation. If I'm talking about building a tool for someone who's not a software developer, to me, that's a very, very different thing. And in order to get there, you want to present the notion of building whatever that is in the sort of context or framing or mentality of that person and what it is they're trying to do, as opposed to, here's how you could quickly build a software application. Like when we still talk about control flow and exception handling and whatever, like those are concepts for software developers, not concepts for, musicians or artists or authors or whoever might be trying to get something done that ultimately they're trying to do with some software oriented tools.
And I'm curious, as someone right in the heart of this space, do you think low code and no code tools are still waiting for that breakout moment? And do you think it will ever fully take off, or is it already doing that?
I kind of lean towards the already.
Yeah.
It's, I'm trying to think of a good example or a good comparison, but we often talk about startups as these overnight successes when they get really big. And it's always 10 years into the journey. Like invariably, I don't know why that's the mark, but it's, it's always kind of in the 10 years time frame, plus or minus. But, and so I feel like we've been on this journey for a really long time. I do think, when we talk about, again, low code, we're constantly trying to build less and reuse more. And so that's been a journey that for as long as I've been in software, we've been on. We just have different tools and, and then it gets captured as, hey, we could market this as low code and more people will want to use it or whatever. So it's always a funny thing. The no code thing, I was thinking about this and I sort of had this notion that we're not there yet, but then I realized how much of it I see every day. So I play the guitar. I don't know if you know any guitarists, but they're all obsessed with tone and have like a million effects pedals and all this stuff to try to like perfectly sculpt the sound of their guitar, right? And something that's happened more recently is this concept called modeling, which is really emulating all these kind of old, amplifiers and effects pedals and everything through software. And when you build a signal chain, meaning like you're simulating putting a bunch of effects pedals together, they don't talk at all about the software that's underlying it, right? You know that your thing has a certain firmware version or whatever, but you get literally a picture where you drag and drop, pictures of pedals basically together and connect them to an amplifier and then say, I want this kind of microphone, I want it placed this distance. And all of it is simulation, but all of it is framed very much in the mentality of a guitarist, right? Something that a guitarist understands, not what a software developer understands, but what you're actually doing is composing together a software application, right? So that you your signal goes in one end and it comes out totally different out of the other end. But to me, that's actually what no code looks and feels like, right? There's this really complex software application that you're constructing on the fly, but you don't need to know anything about software to do that. You need to know your domain. And in this case, that's a guitarist. But again, it could be in a bunch of different places. And so I think it's out there. I think that when we think of no code as I'm building a software application, most developers don't want to not write code. They want to not write the boring code, but they want to solve a really interesting problem. So if there's no problem to be solved, then you're not going to get software developers working on that. So who is no code for? I think it's for the people who have no interest in building software, but they have some other problem that they really understand deeply, and you want to give them the tools to solve that problem. And that, I think, is happening.
And you made a great point there about those 10-year overnight success stories. All too often, we celebrate the person at the summit and their moment of success on the top of that mountain, but not the long climb up there. And that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And often the early failures, meaning maybe not even the person who ended up making it to the top, but the people who tried. And they got halfway up and said, well, we found these routes. They totally don't work. We ran out of gear or food or fuel or whatever, because we never actually made it. But we've found all the ways that don't get you there. Right. And then some other team comes along and they can go up the right route because every other one has been tried, sort of thing. And so I think there's a huge amount that goes into this, right? Like, absolutely, in this low code, no code space. I often hear, for example, Excel referred to as, the ultimate low code success. And we've been using that for a really, really long time, right? It's like, I'm trying to model financial data, I guess is where most of us started using spreadsheets. And I just need this one extra thing so I can write this little function or whatever, right? Like, that's designed for that user. We've been doing this for ages. And I actually wonder if maybe we haven't really realized that and then said, okay, what was working, what wasn't working? How can we take that and build on it? But there's a long history around this stuff. And we kind of want these overnight changes that, they're never overnight.
It's so refreshing to hear you say that. And I also, before you came on the podcast, I recently came across CircleCI's 2022 State of the Software Delivery Report, which highlights the state of software delivery, funnily enough. But what are the biggest takeaways from the report? And I'm curious, again, as someone that is very passionate about this space and probably seen it all before, did anything surprise you in it?
I don't know that anything totally surprised me. I think it's a great encapsulation. And I'll say my favorite takeaway is the emphasis on teams. People always make fun of me for getting irate when we talk about DevOps engineers, because to me, the whole concept of DevOps was about a change in culture, right? Like, we don't have these separate silos. We don't throw things over the wall. We work together. We collaborate. We learn from each other. And saying, well, now we'll just have an engineer who's responsible for the tooling that makes that happen has always thrown me off a little bit. Like, giving one person the responsibility of building a tool is not changing your culture, right? And so when we look at software delivery, I mean, absolutely, we believe that that the tools are important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the space that we're in. We're building software to help all of these teams deliver effectively. But in order to truly get there, there's shifts in culture. So, the team thing is big, meaning, having enough people that you've got resiliency in your team, you've got the ability to keep things moving when someone's, away, or you have enough depth and diversity of experience to really bring new ideas. There's lots of that that makes a team and then therefore an organization successful. And then there's some other things that popped up, like how long teams I guess, are in a broken state from a build perspective. And the answer is not very long, right? So teams that take the quality of their pipeline very seriously, when something breaks on their, trunk or main line, they're fixing it quickly to make sure that everyone's still productive. In order to get there, again, it's a cultural change and focusing on the productivity of everyone. Like, I'm too busy to go fix the build means I'm too busy to help everyone else in the organization be successful. And so we see that real focus on, I won't call it throughput necessarily, but keeping the pipeline open, if you will, so that when someone's trying to get something done, they're not blocked and they're not stuck. So all of the really interesting things for me that come out of that are about how organizations shift their culture, their attitudes, their approaches in order to make the most of the tools. Like, I think the tools are out there. Obviously, I'm a believer in that because we're a builder of one, but I think you can't just fix software or you can't just fix delivery, with great tooling. You need to adopt the great tooling as part of that overall change in how you think about it. And I think that really stands out every time we talk to folks about it.
And I think if we look at the tech industry, there's two big problems at the moment. One is diversity in tech, and two is the tech skill shortage, which is well documented at the moment. And many people convince themselves that they don't have the talent or even the money needed to study and learn how to code. But I've spoken with so many people on this podcast that have actually taught themselves to code and ended up with fantastic jobs and careers. So with all that in mind, can you tell me more about why organizations need to actually stop focusing on hiring talent based on degrees or qualifications, and also ideally what it means to be a good coder and the benefits of having a diverse dev team?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in there. I love all of it. I mean, I mentioned earlier in my background story that I was self-taught effectively. I studied engineering, but I didn't study software in any real way. And so I absolutely agree that there's lots of ways that you can come to this. I think there's lots of interests that people bring. There's lots of different perspectives. And so, going backwards through that from a diversity perspective, having different views, having even for whatever part of your background brings a different point of view on something, getting those fresh ideas is really valuable, right? Like, it's so easy to get into groupthink, or everyone is kind of saying the same thing, and therefore we're not exploring the full problem space. And maybe we'll optimize something that we understand instead of looking at it from a completely different angle. And that completely different angle is far more valuable, I think, than people give credit to. And so I think historically, we've sort of built up this perspective of what a great software engineer looks like, and it's quite myopic. I think we focus a lot on the mechanics of the specific job of writing code, but I mean, I just spent all this time talking about how it's about culture and teams and like how people work together. Like, that's such a small. It's important, absolutely. Like, you need to understand data structures and algorithms to whatever degree, but that's not the hard part of the job, right? If I've learned anything in the last 25 years, it's always about people. And there's lots of different folks that, join teams and make those teams better just by the way that they sort of influence the way that people interact. And we don't spend enough time thinking or talking about that. I think we spend it all on sort of, the basics, the mechanics. But the mechanics of software development are probably critical for your first 3 to 5 years. And then you get to that place where you're like, okay, I get it. I understand how to build something. How do I align what I'm building with the vision and goals of this business? Like, do I truly understand what the customer is trying to do? Can I avoid building 90% of this stuff because I know what's really important to the customer? Like, that whole shift is really critical as engineers grow. And a lot of the people who, set out to just solve technical problems because they like that actually struggle to make that transition. I've had a lot of success with folks coming in through, boot camps or other kind of, like, I learned later and I'm deciding to make a career change. Like, you don't have to go to a boot camp, but because those people bring very interesting sets of experiences and have maybe had a career in some other place, right? And have learned some really interesting and valuable things and bring that maturity, but then also say, oh, okay, cool. And this is how I, learn about software or whatever. I think that's super valuable. But, as organizations, to kind of get back to the very beginning of what you're asking, we like patterns as humans, not just as organizations, right? We like patterns, we like shortcuts. And so we say, oh yeah, people who went to this school and have this degree, they're great software developers. And maybe they got the mechanics, but that's kind of what you learn in school. right? Is here's how a program functions, and a lot less of here's how an organization functions, right? Here's how you can contribute and build up the people around you and make a whole team successful, or drive a decision-making process around, a massive architectural concern that impacts 20 or 30 teams in your organization. Like, folks aren't learning that. And if you have interest in any of those things, I think you can pick up the mechanics. And I keep referring to coding as the mechanics, but that's like, I often make references to soccer because both my kids play soccer. It's like learning the foot skills versus finally being able to lift up your head and look at the game, right? And like, where are we positioned on the field and who's moving where and how are we all interacting together? And I think it's very different, again, from what you learn in school. And I think it's something that lots of people have lots of experience to bring, which is not to say that everyone should be a software developer. But if you think it's interesting, I guess I'll end on that. More than anything else, if you think it's interesting and you're passionate about it, you'll figure out the rest.
100%.
Yeah.
100% with you on that. And of course, we started the podcast talking about the changes in the past decade as companies have become more increasingly software based. But so where do you see it all heading from here? Is there anything in particular that excites you about the future?
I mean, I love this stuff. That's probably pretty clear. So I'm always excited whether I can guess what's going to happen or not. I think the thing that we're seeing, which has been a continued evolution, even over, I'll call it 20 years or more, in terms of Agile and then CI/CD and like the whole space of how do we build less as quickly as possible, get it in front of customers and learn, whether we're learning that this wasn't actually what they were interested in, or if we tweak it in this little way, they'll love it, or this thing doesn't work fast enough, or it keeps crashing, whatever that is, right? How quickly can we learn? And we still have that. I think we've come a long way. Absolutely. We still have that broken into kind of silos, like developer works on their laptop, desktop, wherever, and then we put something in a pipeline and then it goes into production and like folks in SRE or ops keep an eye on it, sort of thing. And I think that the next stage of this is sort of more of a continuum, meaning all the way from the point that I'm working on code as I'm thinking of it to the point that the last customer who's ever going to see it sees it. I have this feedback coming back from the most production-like or even production environment, telling me whether it's working, whether it's meeting the needs of my customers, whether it's driving the business. And I think to get there, we have to continue the work of breaking down those silos, breaking down those walls. And I think the tooling starts to feel more fluid, meaning it almost feels like I'm writing software in the production environment, which I wouldn't necessarily advise because never works that well, but you're really close to that, right? Like the smallest possible increments with the fastest possible feedback. And I think we have lots of little pockets that we're gonna get through to get there. Like as we talked about low code and no code and reusing other components and everything. Like there's lots of stuff we're using that we don't even necessarily understand at this point. So getting that visibility, getting that feedback saying, oh, it wasn't just your code, but this other dependency that you're using changed. And now this other issue is occurring. And to allow us to move again as quickly as possible, out innovate our competitors, but do it in a way that we feel really comfortable that what we're putting in front of our customers is both what they want and is working the way that we wanted it to. And so I think it's effectively, I'm like moving my hands trying to draw this continuum. And so I apologize because I know this is only audio, but it's this smooth sort of feeling of just every like continuity, I guess, right? We use continuous in all these different terms, but just that continuity all the way from what I'm thinking about putting in front of customers to them seeing it and me knowing that it's good and being able to build on that. I think that's continues to be the evolution of this space for many years to come.
Love that. And we started the podcast talking about your origin story. And just before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you, is there what's the funniest or most interesting story that happened in your career to bring us home? Is there anything that springs to mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go all the way back to those early days of learning about software. I will say, like, over the course of 25 years, the number of things that have gone horribly wrong for me is innumerable, and they all make for pretty comical moments. But I think this maybe set my path. So I'm working in this factory as a process engineer, and then started to work on data and analytics and pipelining data, and so I built this little internal kind of, we would have called it an intranet back in the day, web application that showed where the defects were and sort of did like breakdowns and analysis of them and stuff. And I built them all. I knew nothing about software at the time. So I was actually speaking of low code, I built them all using these things called ActiveX controls, which I don't know if anyone will remember, but they were like widgets that you put on a web page that could show, charts and graphs and tables and all this kind of stuff. And I was just kind of gluing them together with whatever I could figure out how to do. And I had the opportunity to present this to the GM of our business unit. Which is like, I'm a new grad, basically. So this is 7 or 8 levels above me in the organization. I don't even know. And so I walk in and I talk for 5 minutes about all this amazing work that I've done and how we're going to streamline the process and everything. And so I go to give the demo, and we pull it up on his machine, and he's a Netscape user. And ActiveX controls only worked in Internet Explorer. I knew nothing about any of this, right? I'm like brand new to software. And I'm like, this is like my first time ever showing anything to anyone. And I'm like, but it works on my machine. Like it's the most classic kind of mistake that you could make in a software build, right? And just that, I mean, I wouldn't have even known that there was another browser. Like, this is how naive and unknowledgeable I was, right? But I would never have thought to go test it on this other browser and make sure it was all going to work and plan for the demo and whatever. And so here we are, 25 years later, and I've spent the last 8 years of my career focusing on exactly this problem. So I think it's like come back around, and it absolutely shaped how I thought about software after that, in terms of like, yeah, it's fine to write the code, but you need to make sure that your customer is experiencing what you were experiencing. And I'll say that's lasted with me throughout my career.
What a great story. And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about anything we talked about today, from the report or just some of the work that you're doing, what's the best starting point for all things CircleCI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, find our website, CircleCI.com. Pretty straightforward. We have, that report that you talked about. We blog regularly about everything in the industry, because we love all of it, not just about our product. And then I actually have my own podcast called The Confident Commit, where I talk to folks about lots of these issues, mostly recently talking about failure. So you could see I'm dialed in on that topic, and I love it when things go wrong, because we always learn something interesting. Or find me on Twitter at Zub. It's Z00B or Z, I guess, depending on your audience.
Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes, including the one to the podcast, so people can find you nice and easy. And I've just loved chatting with you today about the history of software eating the world, and how that constant pressure now to innovate faster and the competition for developer talent is leading companies to lean towards no-code and low-code solutions, just essentially to help developers get more work done. But I think it's something we could talk about for another few hours. But more than anything, just thank you for sitting down and sharing that with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
I know you have unique experiences and insights, and I want you to be part of this conversation. And there are many ways that you can contact me. Simply email me at techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you would like to slide into my DMs and send me an audio message on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, you can find me at Neil C. Hughes. So I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.